Okay, back to the Develop module in Lightroom. So we've talked about the tools, some of the tools in the Develop module, all of these tools just below the histogram. And we've talked about this section here called the Basic section with lots of controls for exposure and what's called presence, white balance, and so on. The next section below Basic is called Tone Curve. And for those of you who have worked in Photoshop, you've dealt with tone curves before. The tone curve is a way of adjusting areas of light and dark based on whether they're in the highlights or the shadows. And it's really just a different way of adjusting things that we've dealt with in the basic area in terms of exposure, more in terms of highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. With the tone curve, you can pull on it or push on it and adjust different areas of the image in terms of light and dark and in terms of color. So first for light and dark, if you watch my cursor, you can see that it pulls this little dot up and down the curve. And when it's at the bottom left, that deals with shadows. As you go up, it goes into the darks, not quite as dark as shadows, then to the lights, and finally highlights, the brightest areas. So you can, as I said, you can set the dot and then move the curve up and down just to affect certain areas. Here I'm lightening the highlights, the light areas and the highlights, pulling them down, and as I again move the slider, I control different areas. Notice that below the tone curve, there are sliders as well. And as I move the curve, those sliders move. So if you prefer to use sliders, you can do that instead. I can move the darks here, and you can see that the curve moves with it as I do that. The shadows, I can open up the shadows. I can bring down the highlights if I want to. Bring up highlights, bring up maybe down the brightest areas here, like so. This doesn't adjust the overall bright and dark. That is, it's not changing the overall exposure, just certain areas. And again, you can work either with the tone curve or with the sliders to adjust the overall exposure. Again, you want to do that in the basic area with the exposure slider, like so. And here as well, you can open up the shadows, bring down highlights. So there are different areas, different ways of adjusting areas in the image. Okay,